Another immigration confrontation at the U.S. southern border. Thousands of Haitian migrants, a mass concern for the Biden administration.
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president, but it was horrible to see, as you saw. To see people treated like they did.
While challenges remain at the southern border, thousands of Afghan refugees are entering the United States. The president campaigned on changing immigration policies. Who gets in, who is not getting in, and why? On the Inside Story, Biden and the Borders. I'm Patsy Widakuswara at the White House. President Joe Biden is facing rising criticism over his handling of Haitian migrants at the U.S. southern border. More than 14,000 migrants crossed the U.S.-Mexican border in recent weeks, setting up camps underneath a bridge in Rio Texas. Images of Border Patrol agents on horseback chasing Haitian migrants has sparked outrage and questions about the Biden administration's immigration policies. We begin our coverage in Rio, Texas. Thousands of migrants, many of them Haitians living in South America, have crossed the U.S.-Mexico border in Rio, Texas, seeking asylum. Hundreds have been expelled by the administration back to Haiti, a country mired in poverty and violence. It's an inhumane, counterproductive response, said U.S. Special Envoy to Haiti Daniel Foote, who quit his job in protest Wednesday. Our policy approach to Haiti remains deeply flawed, and my recommendations have been ignored and dismissed, Foote said in his resignation letter.
The fact is, there have been multiple senior-level conversations on Haiti where all proposals, including those put forward by Special Envoy Foote, were fully considered in a rigorous and transparent process.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken rejected Foote's accusation, as did White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
Special Envoy Foote had ample opportunity to raise concerns about migration during his tenure. He never once did so.
Still, the Biden administration continues to be haunted by images from the border, including of agents on horseback chasing migrants.
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president, but it was horrible to see, as you saw. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped. It's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay. There will be an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences.
Immigration analysts say this change in policy does not address the bigger question of what to do with the influx of people at the border, a real challenge for the administration.
The Biden administration really wanted to send a message that it was breaking completely with the immigration policies of the Trump administration that were seen as cruel and inhumane. But at the same time, the Biden administration, I think, fears that if they treat the Haitian migrants all as asylum seekers and allow them in, that will send a message to people around the world that the U.S. border is open.
Daniel Foote declined VOA's request for an interview. In his resignation letter, he pointed out Haiti cannot possibly absorb the deported migrants. The country is facing numerous crises, including last month's earthquake, the assassination of its president in July, and rampant gang violence causing many to flee.
COVID has made it difficult for them to be able to work, to sustain themselves. These are individuals who came from Haiti in the wake of a lot of earthquakes and then went to South America.
Democrats in Congress have urged the administration to stop expulsions. The United Nations, which rarely criticizes U.S. policy, has also denounced the expulsions of Haitians as inconsistent with international norms. President Biden sets U.S. immigration policies and priorities. His Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, is responsible for seeing they are carried out. Secretary Mayorkas recently took questions from the White House press corps explaining how the administration can expel people because of COVID-19 under Title 42, a law code used in the same way by the Trump administration.
Migrants continue to be expelled under the CDC's Title 42 authority. Title 42 is a public health authority and not an immigration policy. And it is important to note that Title 42 is applicable and has been applicable to all irregular migration during this pandemic. It is not specific to Haitian nationals or the current situation. To date, DHS has conducted 17 expulsion flights to Haiti with approximately 2,000 individuals. Those who are not expelled under Title 42 are placed in immigration removal proceedings. Individuals, as I mentioned, with acute vulnerability can be accepted from the Title 42 application. Approximately 12,400 individuals will have their cases heard by an immigration judge to make a determination on whether they will be removed or permitted to remain in the United States. The Title 42 authority has been applied to irregular migration since the very beginning of this administration and before. And it has applied to individuals from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and other countries. It has been applied equally, and the exceptions that I cited have been the exceptions that have applied to all. There are 3 exceptions: the Convention Against Torture, acute vulnerabilities such as extreme medical needs, and operational capacity. Those are the 3 exceptions. Title 42 authority has been applied irrespective of the country of origin, irrespective of the race of the individual, irrespective of other criteria that don't belong in our adjudicative process and we do not permit in our adjudicative process.
Migrants from Haiti trying to get into the United States is not a new phenomenon. U.S. policy regarding Haitians is complex and goes back decades, shaped against a backdrop of natural disasters, political instability, and violence. VOA's Arash Arabasadi explains.
It recently began in July with the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse and an investigation that seems stuck in park. A little more than a month later, in August, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake shook much of the southern part of Haiti to the ground. The ongoing crises persuaded thousands of Haitians to seek asylum somewhere else.
It's not that Haitians necessarily want to exit. It's simply that the situation is so bad and so desperate that they do not have another choice.
Haitians fleeing the country gained momentum in the 1990s because of an uprising against the country's first democratically elected president.
And it started again, a major wave after the coup that overthrew Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And because of political problems, the waves continued, and the earthquake of 2010 was one of the major, if you wish, triggers that led the Haitians to the United States and elsewhere.
Faton says a weak global economy in the 1970s triggered in part the mass migration of Haitians to the U.S. In the 1980s, the administration of U.S. President Ronald Reagan sent back Haitian migrants who were intercepted at sea trying to come to the U.S. Those who made it to the U.S. faced prison. More than 25,000 Haitian migrants were sent back. In 1991, a coup ousted Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide from power, creating years of instability only for the administration of U.S. President Bill Clinton to bring him back to power to oversee what Faton calls a neoliberal economy that collapsed and never recovered. In their search for a better life, some Haitians spend their life savings just to leapfrog from countries like Brazil and Chile to get to the United States.
It was a very long trek, and they had assumed that they could, in fact, get into the United States, and most of them found that was simply wrong.
More than 12,000 of the 30,000 Haitian migrants who amassed at the border in September were eligible to seek asylum in the U.S. Another 8,000 went back to Mexico voluntarily. At least 2,000 were flown back to Haiti.
The situation in Haiti is getting really desperate, especially for very poor people. The economic situation has deteriorated significantly. Poverty has increased. The rural areas have suffered significantly because of bad agricultural policies, and also because life in the rural areas is a life of deprivation. So people move to the urban areas, they create those huge slums, and there are no jobs to satisfy their economic needs. And in addition to that, they are confronted with the gangs, and you have a government that is completely dysfunctional.
Faton says Haiti's problems are problems Haitians should solve on their own. He says he's hopeful for the future as the country has hit rock bottom, but adds he's been saying the same thing for the past 20 years. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Protecting the border and managing immigration are challenges faced by every American president. As the Biden administration manages criticism over its handling of the Haitian migrant surge, concerns remain over the future of U.S. immigration policies. VOA reporter Alini Barros has covered immigration policy under both Democratic and Republican administrations. She explained the evolution of America's immigration policy in a conversation with the Inside Story producer Elizabeth Cherneff.
Alini, what U.S. immigration policies were executed in order to deal with this most recent influx of Haitian migrants?
So there are a few things happening right now. We have Title 42 in place, which is basically a federal health code that was put in place under the Trump administration, that the Biden administration decided to keep it. And the Title 42 basically allows immigration officials at the border to expel migrants. What does that mean? It means that they do not go in front of an immigration judge. It means that they are immediately sent back to the home country. And it's the same guideline, it's the same policy that is happening to all migrants. It's not just Haitian migrants. So migrants from Central American and other nationalities, they are met with the same policy. But the Biden administration, they made a few exemptions, right? So unaccompanied minors and family units with tender age children might be paroled in. They are usually paroled in. Immigration officers at the border, they have the discretion to parole them in, to allow them to be paroled under humanitarian conditions. And they might be, one, fighting a removal proceedings, a potential order of deportation, while asking for asylum, while asking for the possibility of staying permanently in the U.S. A number of Haitian migrants, they were paroled in, but however, they are they will be able to ask for asylum. They will be able to go in front of an immigration judge or an asylum officer. But at the same time, they're fighting already the possibility of being sent back. So while some people were sent back, the folks who were allowed in, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stay here.
Right. And you touched on a really interesting point that I think is confusing. Why are we seeing some people sent back to the country of Haiti on planes, and yet others are allowed to stay in the USA?
That's exactly because of Title 42, because we have exemptions, right? Because a CBP officer, a Customs Border Protection officer, they have the discretion, they have the authority according to immigration law to look at you and say, you are a woman with a tender age child, you are in a very vulnerable situation, I'm going to parole you in, But here's the thing, and this is based on the interviews that I've done with people at the border in the past, with now immigration lawyers. A lot of these people, they understand that they need help. When you are asking for help at the border, you don't have access to lawyers easily as someone who is already inside of the United States, right? There are advocate groups, there are immigrant advocate groups at the border, but the amount of people that need help is much higher than the amount of lawyers available. So you're going to be fighting your removal proceedings, you're going to be fighting a potential deportation order while trying to get your asylum at the same time.
How is this latest wave being handled in comparison to prior waves of migrants arriving at the border?
So Haitians have come to the U.S. to seek asylum at the borders for decades. But in every presidential administration since 1970s has treated migrants differently. So some rejected asylum seekers, while others held them longer in detention. Some administrations, they had the U.S. Coast Guard basically intercepting boats and sending them back right away. We also had an administration sending Haitian migrants to Guantanamo. So it depends on the administration. They are dealing with the Haitian migrants waves differently. Right now, the position of the U.S. government is, don't come, you're going to be sent back.
Those terms, I think there's a lot of confusion about what those terms mean, the terms seeking asylum, refugee, expulsion, deportation.
Sure. If you are an asylum seeker, if you're a migrant and you need help, the key is for you to be an asylum seeker, for you to go through asylum, you have to be in U.S. territory to do that. As a refugee, you go through a process outside the country. You go through the UN, you apply, you actually receive refugee status. So when you come to the United States, you already have the path for permanent residency, which in 5 years will allow you to file for your citizenship if you wish. So if you were expelled, it doesn't carry legal consequences to you as a potential asylum seeker again. But if you went through an immigration proceedings, if you went through a removal proceedings and you lost your case and you actually received an order of deportation from an immigration judge, according to U.S. law, if you come back, you might be barred from entering the U.S. So that's basically the difference.
Are we seeing consistency in how the Biden administration is implementing immigration policies?
So the immigration law that the Biden administration is abiding, is using it, is the same one that the Trump administration had. The difference is that Trump wanted to, continue construction of the border wall. He wanted to work on policies to restrict not only unauthorized immigration, but legal immigration as well. Cutting visa caps and things like that. The Biden administration, he's in a way pushing for a more positive tone on immigration. However, he has been heavily criticized by immigrant advocates for keeping Title 42 in place and for the continuation of expelling migrants at the border.
It seems like the images and the videos this past week of Border Patrol agents on horseback, those images have just resounded with viewers and audiences really around the world. What Can you tell us about the administration's reaction to this, how they're handling it, the fallout?
There will be investigation. There is an ongoing investigation, according to immigration officials. Biden said that he took full responsibility, and the horseback unit has been suspended for now. So that was something that Mayorkas came out and said it has been suspended. We're not using horses as of now because we're having an investigation. The administration has been saying, don't come to the U.S., don't come to the U.S. illegally. But when you have Border Patrol officers, at ports of entry, and some advocates are saying that migrants are not allowed in, so migrants will turn to try to get into the country in between ports of entry. Because again, in order for them to ask for help, they need to be in the U.S. So that's a point that immigrant advocates have been pushing a lot, saying, this idea of not allowing immigrants through ports of entry to ask for asylum the right way pushes them to come in between ports of entry and pushes them to cross illegally.
Alini Barros, VOA immigration reporter, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
As the U.S. completed its military withdrawal from Afghanistan in August, thousands of evacuated refugees are waiting to be resettled. Here in the city of Washington, D.C., local business owners, some refugees themselves, are stepping up to collect donations and supplies for their new neighbors. VOA's Karina Bafrazian tells us more.
The owners of this Washington, D.C. restaurant called Lapis have spent the last few weeks collecting donations for Afghan refugees that were evacuated to the United States. Wine shelves hold hundreds of boxes full of everything from clothing and personal hygiene items to dinnerware and cleaning supplies. The person behind this makeshift donation center is Fatima Popal, the owner of a number of DC restaurants. She says her desire to help the refugees stems, among other reasons, from personal history.
We are also refugees from a different time period of war in Afghanistan, so we do understand how most of these refugees feel. Of course, our time period is a little bit different, where it wasn't the Taliban regime, but...
Popal's family left Afghanistan in the 1980s when Fatima was just 6 months old. They have been living in the U.S. since 1987 and today own 3 restaurants in the U.S. capital. She decided to spread the word about the donation center on social networks and was flooded with gratitude and responses.
Both my brother and I woke up with just a social media blast of just people just wanting to help, not only to donate, but also to help help with giving in their time and volunteering their time for us. And it's just been just beautiful to see how the community has come together, how everyone just wants to help and donate.
Receiving the donations, sorting through them, filling up trucks with the necessary items, and then doing it all over again. This is what Popal and dozens of volunteers have been doing since. A lot of business owners in the Washington, D.C. area are collecting donations for the Afghan refugees, both small businesses and giants like Airbnb that promised to provide 20,000 Afghan refugees with free accommodations around the world. A myriad of charity organizations in the U.S. have also volunteered to do what they can to help. Catholic Charities located in Virginia is one of them.
What we have here is just 1 day's worth of donations. Amazon drivers were dropping them off truckload after truckload, all donated.
Stephen Caratini, CEO of Catholic Charities in Arlington, Virginia, says the numbers of Afghan refugees are quickly rising.
We obviously think that that's going to continue to be an increasing number over the next few months and even years. When they come to this country, we're usually the first faces that they see. We meet them at the airport. And then things happen very, very quickly after that. The priority is to help these families into housing, find permanent housing as quickly as possible, and then also begin the search for employment.
Volunteers, on top of physical help, don't forget about psychological help as well. They keep in touch with the refugees, help with advice, help them calm down. No one wants to leave their home country like that, says Fatima Popal. But if they have to, she adds, the least others can do is to help the refugees find a second home in the U.S. Karina Bafrajian for VOA News, Washington.
Stay tuned at voanews.com and our social media for the latest on U.S. immigration policies. Stay connected with me on Twitter at @PWidakuswara. From the White House, I'm Patsy Widakuswara. See you next week on The Inside Story.